Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. As you can see, I'm not with you, but I will give you a bit of perspective of how the International Transport Forum, an intergovernmental organization bringing together 59 member countries, is thinking about new mobility and some of the economic implications this will have over time. And to do that, I'll speak about three things. I'll speak a bit about cities, I'll speak a bit more about new mobility options that we have available to us, and then I'll talk about some of the economic and regulatory implications that these implies. One of the things we think about when we think about cities and transport is movement. Of course, cars moving, buses moving, people cycling, people walking. But from an economic perspective, what happens in cities doesn't necessarily come from the movement of people, but rather what people do when they stop. That is when economic activity takes place. That is where the creativity of our cities are best able to express themselves. Access is really what transport enables in cities. Access to opportunity, access to people, access to jobs, education facilities, health facilities. And so when we think about mobility in the city, it's important to try to understand how this access will change over time, because this is what is at the crux of the economic potential for transport in our cities. Now, mobility in our cities used to be a fairly easy proposition. You could walk, you could ride your bicycle, take public transport, and in the last century, you can use a car. Now, this mobility landscape is changing, and it's changing quite rapidly. We see the arrival of bike share systems, of new forms of public transport, on-demand public transport, informal public transport, car sharing, ride sharing, and a number of other options that we have not yet even begun to imagine. Against this change in the type of modes that are available to us, we see that there is an infusion of digital technology and digitalization of the city that enables greater and greater efficiency in the way in which these modes interact with clients, with customers, with citizens, and with the city. Finally, we see a few other things that will probably enable different types of mobility going forward in the next few years. The first is the increasing automation of some of these modes. Public transport already is the case for metro systems, but also cars, which we believe will see some automated, highly automated vehicles on our streets within the next 10 to 15 years, and maybe even sooner than that. But behind all this, there is the infusion of artificial intelligence, where these vehicles are starting to speak not only to themselves, but to infrastructure, and starting to make decisions based on this input that does not involve directly humans. It's the algorithmization of our cities. These trends are all coming together and are changing the mobility landscape in our cities. And this will change the way in which people access cities. And this will have an impact, as I said, on the economic performance of cities. These things are coming together, as I said, but one of the things that is very unclear is what form this convergence will take place. Now, at the International Transport Forum, we've been trying to think about some plausible scenarios of how you might see this convergence roll out in cities. And I'll describe one very briefly now, but that will give you a way of thinking about some of the potential changes that could happen. In this thinking, in this scenario, we've tried to understand what are the impacts of increased and ultimately full sharing of all available capacity in vehicles in the cities. We've looked at modeling a city's normal daily activity with cars, with pedestrians, with public transport, and replacing all of the non-public transport metro type trips and walking trips with one of three different modes. The first is an on-demand shared taxi. The second is an on-demand taxi bus, so a bus that has no route, no stops, but comes to meet people. And then, of course, the Lisbon, because in this case we're looking at the city of Lisbon, the Lisbon metro system. We've done the same study in 3 other cities, but I'll present to you today just the findings from the Lisbon case. And what we see is that when all of those trips, car trips, bus trips, are replaced with one of these modes, we can reduce the fleet of cars operating, in this case the city of Lisbon, by 97%. That is, people will still have the same trips, they can still make the same travel plans they had before, the same travel options they had available to them before in terms of departure time and arrival time, and departure location and arrival location, but with only 3% of the current car fleet. That is a massive reduction in the amount of vehicles that are required to deliver today's daily mobility. What we can see is that this has a large implication